Welcome back, students. Let's go ahead and jump into our next lesson on file management. Let's go ahead and discuss remote desktop and virtualization. So starting off, what is remote desktop? Well, remote desktop is really any kind of software that allows a personal computer to be run remotely. And the same concept can be done with a server, so you can have remote access to a server. Now, some software allows for full control over a user session, and this is typically known as remote administration because you can run different tasks in the background, you can run programs, you can use different things that require an elevated level of privilege within the computer. Now, remote access to a computer can only be done over the internet or over a network. You can't remote access a computer that's not connected otherwise. If your computer is offline, I'm trying to get to it because you can't remote into it. Now, typically remote desktop applications are used by businesses and manufacturers for things such as technical troubleshooting of consumers' problems. Whether it's something like a driver issue, or maybe they're trying to install some software, or there's an application that you have running and they need to remote in to configure it. Those are different things that it can be used for. Now, there are multiple types of software out there, whether they're freeware, open source, proprietary, that can do remote access. Things like TeamViewer, for example, a lot of times you'll see there's a freeware version, but like if you're using it for commercial purposes, a lot of times they'll require the business that uses it on a regular basis to purchase a license. Now, how does this software work? Well, it typically operates in that of a client-server implementation, where one side of it is acting as a client and the other computer acts as a server. The controlling computer will therefore receive and display a copy of the screen from the controlled computer. So if let's say I would take this laptop right now and remote into like your computer, for example. Your computer would be the controlled computer, and my computer would be the controlling computer. And I would be able to see a copy of whatever is on your screen. Software on the controlling computer then transmits data back to the controlling computer, and the controlling computer then performs the desired task. So I can see a screen. If I have access to remove, sometimes it's just the screen. Remember, that's just remote desktop. If it's remote administration, I can request for access, and then I can move your mouse around. I can click on different things. I can run different programs and applications depending upon whatever needs to be done. Now, let's also take a quick segue here and talk about virtualization. Now, desktop virtualization is a software technology that allows a user to use a computer environment without needing the physical device to access it. This is used a lot, typically within server implementations, but it can also be used within desktop environments as well. Now, desktop virtualization implementations operate in a client-server computing environment as well. Typically, what you'll see is the application execution will take place on a remote operating system, which communicates with the local client device over a network using a remote display protocol to which the user interacts with applications. Then all applications and data used remain on the remote system with only the display, keyboard, and mouse information communicated with the local client device. So your local PC is telling very much where the mouse is, where the keyboard is, but all your applications, all your software and stuff like that are being pulled down from a virtual machine. You aren't physically accessing that. A good way for you to kind of think about this would be, even though it's not quite the same thing, is, for example, you have your network drives, which you don't have a physical drive attached to your computer. You have a virtual drive that's out there. Now, again, that's not quite the same thing of what we're talking about here, but it's kind of a close example of something that can give you that you might be familiar with. So your N drive is a virtual drive because you don't actually have access to that physical drive. Like there's no N drive located in your computer, but you can still access it because it's attached to the server. Now, desktop virtualization also provides a means of things like resource sharing, typically to distribute low-cost desktop computing services. Whether this is common files or applications, that's what it's used for. All right, one last thing to really kind of talk about here before we segue into the lab. Let's just really quickly discuss that of virtualization versus that of emulation. Now, there's a distinct difference between these two technologies that function similarly. Some people might think they're very similar, but there is some differences. Virtualization provides a virtualized interface to hardware that would normally run a physical copy of the device. So VMs, or virtual machines, their goal is to provide an isolated environment. So Like you could run a virtualized environment of the Windows operating system I'm running right now. You're not trying to, it would be operating system that could function on that hardware. So it's a virtualized thing, but it's isolated, which means that if somebody were to attack that operating system, it wouldn't really necessarily affect anything. Like it could still affect things, but it's a virtualized machine, so you're not actually necessarily accessing the sensitive data and stuff like that would normally be stored on the hard drive because it's all in a virtual environment. Emulators, on the other hand, emulate or use software to pretend to be hardware that the interface was using. Emulators' goal is then to accurately reproduce behaviors on hardware. A good example of emulators would be, if you've ever played like an older console emulator, like Super Nintendo, PlayStation, etc. Obviously, you don't have a physical PlayStation that you're playing on. Instead, what you're doing is you're emulating, you're pretending to be the hardware that would be functioning on. That's an emulation, not a virtualization. All right, and that's going to wrap up today's notes, folks. So until the next time.